Hi everybody, good afternoon or good morning depending on where you're viewing this broadcast from. Welcome to the launch of the Future of Work report, prepared as part of a collaboration between the University of New South Wales, the Australian Taxation Office and the Department of Home Affairs. My name is Andrew Mann and I'm the lead for workforce strategy at the Australian Public Service Commission, and I'll be your chair today. First up, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we're meeting on today and pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to especially welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who are with us today. Today we've got a fabulous panel of experts. Jackie Curtis from the ATO will speak on the future of work in the public service, the Australian Public Service. Associate Professor Sue Williamson will take us through the details of the report. And Dr. Damian West will explain how the ACT Public Service is planning their future workforce and workplace flexibilities. And we'll have about 15 minutes for questions at the end. I'm personally really excited about this launch today and about the paper and the content itself. With the first APS workforce strategy launched earlier this year, and the fact that we're now implementing that, we're seeing that there are two elements of the strategy, which are very pertinent to today's content. Firstly, the attraction and retention of the workforce we need now and into the future. And secondly, how our flexible and responsive workforce models can be designed to take advantage of the new data and technology that will be available. As we're implementing these work streams already and working with agencies through the Centre for Excellence in Workforce Planning, we're increasingly being drawn into conversations about organisation design and questions of organisational culture as agencies consider the different approaches to their transformation imperatives. And of course, the heartbeat for our work is inclusion and well-being of staff. Today's report makes a significant evidence-based contribution to our deliberations in the public service about the kinds of relationships and working arrangements we should be fostering across public services everywhere, and the kinds of physical environment that will best support delivery of outcomes for Australians wherever they live. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers today, and would now like to invite Jackie Curtis to speak about her vision for the future of work in the APS. Jackie is the Chief Operating Officer in the ATO, the Australian Tax Office. She leads the corporate and enabling services functions. These functions include strategic planning, governance, finance, corporate risk management, people, integrity, change management, and design of the organisation. Jackie is also a member of the ATO Executive, which is responsible for shaping and setting strategic direction and the oversight of implementation. Jackie is also the inaugural head of the APS HR profession. Jackie holds an Executive Masters in Public Administration from the ANU, is a Fellow of the Human Resource Institute, and was appointed the Adjunct Professor, University of Canberra in 2018. So over to you, Jackie.
Oh, thank you, Andrew, for that lovely introduction. And can I just say how excited I am actually to be here today, helping to launch this really, really important piece of research. And I just wanted to kick off, I guess, by saying that, you know, we talk about the future of work and this report, the future of work. The point that I really want to sort of leave with people today is that the future of work is actually here. It's here now. We are living the future of work. We are living new ways of working. And I don't think any of us, when we commissioned the piece of work from UNSW, and I'll say a little bit more about that and how that came about in a moment, ever imagined the shift and the change that we would experience driven by this pandemic, and how quickly we would be able to move from, you know, really what was very, very small numbers within the public service. I'm talking Commonwealth here, and I'm sure Damian will say a little bit more in a moment about what was happening in ACT, but in the Commonwealth, very small numbers really doing working from home or flexible working, teleworking, whatever you want to call it. Just by way of example, in the tax office, we went within 2 weeks from having less than 1,000 people with any kind of formal working from home arrangement to over 14,000 people working from home, including call centre staff, which, you know, is the holy grail of working from home if you're in a big operational agency, almost unheard of. So, you know, over the last 18 months or so during the pandemic, this shift has occurred. New ways of working are here and they're here to stay. That's not to say there isn't more work to be done to understand how we become more sophisticated and how we embrace and harness the opportunities that we have seen as a result of the pandemic and really the forcing us to move to new ways of working. So I think really that, you know, the one message I want to leave today is we are on a journey, but new ways of working are here. And what we need to do is we need to work together and work with people like UNSW and other organisations to really think about what's the evidence, what's the research, what's the narrative and story that's going to help us to make the most of what is a significant opportunity to think about new ways of working and what that means for us in the future. So I just wanted to start with that. Now, how did we actually come about getting this piece of work and how was it commissioned? Well, for those of you who aren't in the Commonwealth Public Service or don't know too much about what's been going on, the Secretaries Board in February 2020 established a committee called the COO Committee, Chief Operating Officers, and that's made up of Chief Operating Officers from all the major departments and some agencies. And really that committee had two roles. One was managing whole of government operational and implementation matters, and the other one was to progress agreed initiatives under the government's APS reform agenda. But what quickly happened just after we had that awful fire season, we were then hit with the crisis, which was COVID and the pandemic. And in the first few weeks of that committee being organised, the tempo of it was that we were meeting virtually daily. And we were very, very focused on short-term response to a crisis. But I'm very thankful to say that the colleagues of mine at that table, as we met, and we were at the table at the time, we were still meeting together in the early days of COVID, really recognised the fact that this crisis wasn't something that we could sort of plan around, well, how long will it last? We had no idea what was going to come down the track. And so they had the foresight to say, yes, we need to be focused on the here and now, the response to the COVID crisis. What are the working from home arrangements? What will the surge workforce be required in different agencies that have front-facing responsibilities to the community and are going to be really under pressure as a result of the crisis? For example, our colleagues at Services Australia. What are we going to do to think about productivity and well-being, etc.? So that was the short-term thinking, but they all recognised that moving forward, we needed to better understand what the pandemic and what the environment would mean for us as we moved into the longer term. And one of the things that we agreed was that we really needed to get an evidence base to be able to use as our rationale for decision making and our evidence for decision making. And those of you who know me as the head of the HR profession will know this is one of the big things that I'm always saying to HR professionals, but it rings true for anybody in the public sector. It's really critical to have evidence to support your position when you are actually taking forward ideas to an executive board or proposals or initiatives or policies that matter to government. So we commissioned a piece of work which really looked at bringing together the evidence base. And you will see, for those of you who've read the report, and if you haven't, I really strongly recommend you do, because every time you look at it, you see something new and interesting in this material. But when you look at the report, you see there was so much research out there, either that had been done in recent times or that was in the process of unfolding. And even since we commissioned the work, there has just been a plethora of more material, more research, more evidence brought to bear to inform our thinking. And what UNSW and the team led by Sue have been able to do, along with colleagues from agencies across the APS, because it was a joint piece of work, a partnership, and across the public sector, there has been a huge amount of input to try and draw together insights, lessons and evidence base, so that when we were thinking about moving forward and what the position of the public sector, Commonwealth public sector in this instance, would be with regard to our stance for the future of work, we could draw back to an evidence base and we could point to research. And that's why I think it's such an exciting piece of work. And I think that if you read the research, you will see that whilst it has helped to answer some questions for us, there is still a lot of unknowns and still a lot of other areas that need to be explored in order for us to make really informed and balanced decisions. Having said that, though, you'll see in the report there is also an element of it which talks about how to reassure your workforce and build trust and engage your workforce on the future. And one of the things I would call out, because that particular element really resonated for me, is that across our workforce, across the service, not just in the ATO, what our people are saying is they want to know, well, what will the future of work look like for us? Even though we know what it is here and now during the crisis, and you've been quite clear about that, what about 12 months from now? What about 24 months? What about 5 years? And I think what this report does is really calls out the fact that as far as you possibly can, it's important for organisations to put some kind of marker in the sand, I should say, not the stand, the sand, about where they think they're going with this. And I can say from our perspective at the ATO, and I've said this publicly as well, we will not be springing back like the elastic band that's been stretched back to where we were. There is no way that we're going to be able to do that, because, as I said at the very beginning, mindsets have shifted, people have moved on, and people have embraced, for the large part, new ways of working. And when I say new ways of working, I'm not just talking about working from home or working in the office. I don't think we can be as narrow as that. We have to look at all of the ground that has been covered in this report, because it is a very complex space, and the future of work encompasses everything from where you're going to work, right through to hours of work, ways in which you're going to communicate, as Andrew said earlier, job design, capability shifts, etc. So, you know, there are a lot of aspects that this covers. And so when we're thinking of painting a picture for our people about where we think this is going to land, I think it's important that we talk about all of those aspects of work, not just narrow in on working from home or working in the office. So that's sort of the big picture for me with regard to this. As we go through the session with Sue and Damian, and when we get to questions, I really would be keen for you to be asking questions about things like productivity, where we're at on things like culture, and in particular, and this is an area that I think has also resonated from reading the research, the fact that as we become more used to COVID, and as we move perhaps just to living with it, perhaps like we do with the flu, we will need to really be thinking about our offering, our employment offering. And I think what we will end up doing as employers is putting as much laser-like focus on the staff experience as we do now on the customer experience. And the customer experience, as we know, is all about sophisticated tailoring and design, almost down to individual needs, but certainly down to segments of our customer markets. What we will see in the future is that employers will need to be as sophisticated about the staff experience as they are about the customer experience. And just to leave you with a little example of that, we will need to tailor arrangements for individuals or individual work groups or job types. So in our staff survey that we conducted recently with our people, what was really fascinating when you dug down into the analysis of what people wanted is lawyers, for example, only want to hear from their manager once a fortnight. That's the degree of engagement they're looking for, whereas other groups of employees want to be engaged once a week. And that's what I'm talking about. Sophisticated, nuanced leadership, management, and everything else that comes under the bucket of the future of work. So I might leave it there and hand back to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. That was excellent. Thank you, Jackie. We'll move on, I think, to allow lots of time for questions at the end. So I'd now like to introduce Associate Professor Sue Williamson from the Public Service Research Group at UNSW. Sue Williamson specialises in public sector human resources and industrial relations, focusing on workplace gender equality. Recent research includes examining how public sector employees worked from home during the pandemic. She's also researched how middle managers can progress gender equality, identifying barriers and offering solutions on ways forward. Sue has published extensively on these topics in both academic and non-academic media. So I'd like to invite Sue to present.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Jackie, for your words of wisdom. What you're talking about aligns exactly with our report, which is fantastic. So here we go. Okay, launching our fabulous report, which we're all very proud of. So before I get to that, let me just thank the Tax Office and Department of Home Affairs for sponsoring this project. We really enjoyed working on this and think it's an important piece of work that we've done. So what we did was we looked at the last 10 years of academic literature around working from home and remote working, and then looked at all the literature that was emerging throughout the pandemic to try and figure out some emerging trends and try and predict a little bit what might happen and what might be the future of work. I'd also like to thank all my co-authors from the Public Service Research Group who wrote this report with me. Okay, so the big takeaway message is the future of work is hybrid, but it's also remote. Report after report has told us that employees want to continue working from home at least 2 to 3 days a week. As Jackie was saying, at the height of the pandemic, over half of the APS was working from home, and this is expected to continue. The New South Wales government has done a study which has predicted that remote work levels could remain at around 70% above pre-pandemic levels in the future. So that is really high. We also know that the research is telling us that working from home and remote working increases productivity. Pre-COVID, the jury was out on whether or not working from home did increase productivity or not, but since the pandemic, report after report again has told us that both managers and employees consider that productivity increased when people were working from home during the lockdown. A note of caution with this research, however, is that most of it is self-reported from employees and managers. It is very difficult to get quantitative data on this, as I'm sure everyone in the APS knows, and the ACT government as well. So it is self-reported, but it gives us a very good indication. The other main change that we can see through the pandemic, and this was started pre-COVID, but COVID has exacerbated employment and workforce trends, is that remote working is becoming increasingly popular. So pre-COVID, APS agencies were engaging in activity-based working, and activity-based working provides employees with options of working in settings that are used for specific activities. So, for example, quiet areas for policy work, breakout rooms for creative work, collaboration, that kind of thing. When the pandemic hit, there was lots of commentary coming out that activity-based working would necessarily die because of hygiene concerns around sharing workspaces and workstations. A year on, activity-based working is here to stay. It's still popular. And there are benefits to activity-based working as well. It's very good for creativity, it can increase productivity, things like that. So activity-based working is going to stay. The other area is remote working hubs, which is also very interesting. So remote working hubs, we can see from the little diagram here, occur when there is a central head office, and then there are hubs in the outskirts of cities, in the suburbs, or in different cities, even in different states, and globally within different countries as well. So remote working hubs are beneficial for employees because employees are using their employer's infrastructure rather than their working from home setup, which may be not ergonomic. Remote working hubs can also have equity benefits. In America, for example, organisations are placing hubs in neighbourhoods where there are lots of black employees. So it gives them a chance to work close to home, and it gives them employment opportunities. So there are untapped benefits of remote working that need to be looked at. We also know that 66% of business decision makers are reconsidering designing their physical spaces. So this is going to become more important in the future. There are so many emerging human resource issues to look at. It was very difficult trying to figure out which ones to focus on. The report is large, it's quite dense, so I've just chosen a few. As Jackie was saying, the future of work is not just about changing where work is undertaken, but also the way that everybody works. Organisations are considering which tasks can be undertaken synchronously and what's better suited to being asynchronous. So throughout the pandemic, family demands meant that people might have worked at different times during the day. So there's debates around whether or not chronological time, for example 9 to 5, is still the best way of working, if it ever was, or whether it's more useful to think about what can happen asynchronously. Some of the big tech companies are experimenting with different platforms that enables collaborative work to be undertaken at different times, which we can do now with Teams and whatever, but they're looking at more sophisticated ways of doing this, and that will engage employees who are in different time zones as well. One of the other main messages coming through the emerging research is that managers need more guidance. Managers always seem to need more guidance around HR, which is great for us because, that's our bread and butter. So we know that managers faced lots of challenges throughout the pandemic with countering staff isolation, ensuring that people could network, that teams operated effectively, that people were performing optimally, all those sorts of things. Managers need more guidance from HR. We also saw that organisations and the APS and other public sector organisations are becoming increasingly outcomes focused. When the pandemic hit, we saw that the APS pivoted very quickly to address the challenges and the swathes of new work precipitated by the pandemic. And that has resulted in organisations focusing less on presenteeism, which is bodies in the office, and looking more at outcomes focused, because we know people perform when they're working from home or working remotely, as has been the case with lockdown. So this also leads to what does it mean for performance management? Performance management systems will also need to become more outcomes focused as we go ahead. So this is a really important and positive development. Some grey literature coming out has shown that 40% of employees begin the day without a clear understanding of their day's goals. Moving to an outcomes-focused system will enable a better focus on goals and goal setting, and that will improve performance. Moving on to equity issues, which are very close to my heart because my research area is basically equality and diversity. One of the main things coming through is techno-stress. There are lots of physical WHS issues, but techno-stress is interesting. Techno-stress is made up of two elements. It's the feeling that an employee needs to be constantly available, and it's also information overload. So throughout the pandemic, we have seen employees working longer hours, The work is more intense because we're all online, we're all in Zoom meetings and these sorts of presentations. That has exacerbated techno stress. The research also shows that high levels of work-family conflict also exacerbates techno stress. So this is leading to a right to disconnect. The right to disconnect originated in France and Germany some time ago and essentially enables employees to say, I'm not working. It's a collectively negotiated agreement that employees can turn off at 6 o'clock, which seems, kind of crazy that we have to have an agreement for that. But anyway, this is what's happening. So a right to disconnect has emerged overseas. Last year, it was in the Victorian Police's enterprise agreement, and there could well be a push for the right to disconnect emerging from unions in Australia. We also know that working from home exacerbates gender roles. At the start of the pandemic, there was commentary from researchers around maybe working from home could equalise gender roles. Wouldn't that be nice? Anyway, it hasn't turned out to be that way, and report after report shows that women are undertaking increased loads of unpaid housework and domestic and caring work. Men did do more during the lockdown when they're working from home, but women did even more than men did. And so having these gender roles entrenched in the home has implications for women's labour force participation. And so that's something that organisations will need to keep an eye on as well. There are equity issues around who can work from home. So during the pandemic, huge populations of the workforce all went to work from home. Now it's going to become more nuanced. We know, for example, that younger employees value working in the office where they can get some guidance from senior leaders and from their colleagues. We know that older employees like working from home where it's quiet. Employees with disability like working from home as it enables them to manage their health conditions better. And women and those with caring responsibilities also like working from home for work and family reasons. So this has implications in who is going to end up in the office. We need to have a look at this. Is it, men who are returning back to the office? This is going to have gender implications, gender equality implications. So there are equity issues around who can work from home, who can access those provisions, but also who starts to return to the office. And so organisations would do well to monitor those patterns of attendance and make sure that everyone is getting development opportunities and the same opportunities. This leads on to proximity bias. Pre-pandemic, we know that managers, if they couldn't see staff, they were less likely to give them the plum jobs. People working part-time, who are majority are women, were not given the most interesting projects, those important projects needed for career development if they work part-time and they weren't seen in the office as much. Now that people will be starting to return to the office and other people will still stay working at home, proximity bias is something that managers and organisations will once again need to consider. Who knows, it may have gone. Now that managers are used to working remote teams, proximity bias might be a thing of no more, but we don't know. The other thing that's worth mentioning are the right to request provisions in the Fair Work Act and in modern awards. There is a push for the right to request to be expanded. Currently, it covers designated groups of employees, those with caring responsibilities, those with disability, those experiencing domestic and family violence. There is a push to broaden this out to cover greater groups of employees. And the question is really, why not? Because we can see that employees, populations of employees can work from home. So that is something to watch. And also there may become a push where employees want a right to request to work in their employer's organisation. So if organisations are reducing their footprint, employees may end up saying, no, we don't want to work from home and have to use our home infrastructure. We want to work in the office. And so I think this is a sleeper issue, and unions are thinking about this. So there are lots of questions, so many questions. I started off with a big list of about 20 questions and I whittled it down to 5. Here's a few to think about, and Jackie was talking about this too. We need to think about productivity, and I know that public sector organisations are thinking about this. Which jobs can be undertaken remotely or in dispersed workplaces? We know, as Jackie was saying, that call centre employees can now work remotely and from home, so this is really changing things. What's the impact of remote and dispersed working on teams, employees' careers, their career development, and how managers practice, and also managers' careers? How do we share knowledge in various workspaces? That's been one of the downsides of working from home during the pandemic, is that there is less knowledge sharing, harder to get access to networks, those sorts of things, and so this is also really important. Regulatory frameworks may also need to change as ways of working change, and I would love to see what's going on in collective bargaining at the moment, to see if unions are engaged in trying to get working from home into agreements. What does this mean for HR policies? I know organisations are reviewing their working from home policies, but this is an area that also needs to be looked at. So, thank you again to the Tax Office and Home Affairs for sponsoring this project. The report is available on the Public Service Research Group's website, and if you would like to discuss any of these issues with me, there's my email address there. Thank you everyone for attending, and yeah, back to our speakers.
Thank you, Sue. That was excellent, really interesting. And having read the report, I can thoroughly recommend everybody go there right now. It's fantastic. Next speaker is Dr. Damian West from ACT Government. He'll be talking to us about how the ACT Government is planning on looking at their flexible futures. Damian is Deputy Director General of Workforce Capability and Governance in the Chief Minister's Directorate in ACT Government. He's worked extensively with private, not-for-profit and public sector organisations throughout Australia and the Pacific region, and his current role is Deputy Director of Workplace Capability and Governance. In that role, he's responsible for leading and driving whole-of-government strategy to build and enhance the workforce capability of the ACT Public Service, positioning the service to effectively maximise new opportunities as they arise, respond to changing priorities, and deliver high-quality outcomes into the future. So with that, over to you, Damian.
You're on mute, Damian.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Sue and Jackie, for the introductions. And thank you for everyone who's attended today to talk about both this research and for listening to the presentation. So as you've heard already today, the research and the experience at a federal level and hopefully in our jurisdiction in the Territory all oscillate around a similar set of themes about preparing and optimising our workplace experiences from now and furthermore. I think listening to the two previous speakers, there are a number of things I want to just touch upon today that I think are really important. So symbols and symbolism will be really important as we move forward, particularly as we look to maximise flexibility, as we look to maximise activity-based work arrangements and hybrid working arrangements. So I think, as both Sue and Jackie have mentioned, the potential to create different classes of workers due to whether they're present in the workplace or working from a different location really could undermine a lot of the change program that we're looking to implement across all jurisdictions. I think issues of availability and hours of work are incredibly important, and Sue, as we're working through negotiating all of our agreements at the moment, they are questions that are being asked of us, and we are also asking of the unions as we move forward. I think in part what we've seen in our experience of transitioning many thousands of ACT public servants to be able to work in an agile manner and work in a hybrid manner, both at home, at work, or in hub locations, is that the keys around effective management, effective leadership, and as an employee or someone working in team, effective team management itself and contribution are really central to the way that we work. And for me, what I've noticed is a lot of the key core critical capabilities of leaders, supervisors and staff have come to the fore and have really, it's not been new skills that we've landed on, it's the ability to be clear, the ability to be precise, to give a sense of purpose and direction, and to do that with a degree of clarity and across many different modes and mediums that has elevated people from being just able to survive through the last 2 years to be in a position where they've been highly successful and have achieved everything that we've asked them to do over that period. And the last point that probably that concerns me the most, and I think that we will focus a lot of effort on as we move forward, is around team cohesion and how you maintain team cohesion and innovation in an environment where you may never come face to face with the team that you're working with. Now, for many of us who've worked with teams across the country or across the world, that doesn't seem such a far-flung idea. But when it's you're running a team and you don't have the people front and centre, it changes the way that managers operate. And some of the resistance I've seen thus far to our change agenda has come from some very interesting and unpredicted sources. So, which is obviously a source of interest, great interest to me. But I might just move the slide forward, if I may. Sue? So I just wanted to step back a bit here because we've been on this journey for a number of years, and there are a couple of key things that I think I just want to stress in the time that I have. So over the last several years, we've put a huge amount of effort into our physical workplace and the tools that we've given our employees to operate in and to navigate through our physical workplaces. So we've opened up brand new buildings that home thousands of public servants that are full activity based. We did that in the middle of the pandemic with really great uptake and success, but it was a change journey. We had to make sure that staff had the right tools, had access to modern ICT equipment, and that their experience was brilliant. Because as they became accustomed to working in an activity-based manner, and their laptop worked every time they walked into the building, and they could talk to their colleagues and find them, then those issues started to fall away, and people reverted to working together in a collaborative way, and just getting on with getting their job done in the time that we had together. Things that we're focused on now go to elements of the employment framework and our industrial space, because they don't quite reflect the 2021 working environment, and they certainly don't probably position us as well as we would like for out years and thinking about, well, how do we maximise flexibility? How do we maximise the benefits that we hear and we see and we can report on around agility? And then the last three areas in that go to capability, and I've mentioned that. So not just supervisor and manager, I think all parties who are working in teams, staff, everyone needs to strengthen our capabilities to operate this way, understand how to be effective, understand how to communicate with precision, focus on clarity and those sorts of elements. Behaviours, and you've heard a bit of that from Sue and from Jackie previously. If we start to reward certain behaviour, then we will see more of that. And that's really important when we think about equity, when we think about the symbols of what we're suggesting, when we host meetings and how we draw people together. And then structures, which is more of a much bigger discussion that we are having in the territory around how we orientate our whole service to achieve goals. So we've put a lot of effort in the last number of years into our hub and spoke. So that is large buildings in the centre of the city, town centres that offices that we're opening up, and then spoke offices in the north and the south that will allow our employees who may have their key directorate or department in the centre of town to be able to work from much closer to home and maybe work in that environment one day a week, maybe another series of days they go into the office in the city or in the north of Canberra, but having various options for people to consider as they need to and as they think about how they want to come together. And of course, all the way through this, we've been thinking about, well, what are we trying to achieve through these arrangements? And it goes to things of innovation and collaboration, how we can be productive, and how we think about outcome and an outcome-based logic. And it's quite a sizable change when you start to delve right into it. When we think about outcomes and we think about holding people to account for outcomes and skilling people to set outcomes and set expectations around standards. They are not dissimilar, but there is a shift to where we've been in the past. We've seen a huge, I think, as most of our employers have uptaken a response from our employees about their well-being and their engagement and the benefits of having flexibility through COVID, but also in their working day. So very real questions that Sue mentioned about when does the day start and end, and how do we manage that for people so we don't overwork some, and how do we manage that sort of environment where we want contribution and we want people to work in a really effective way. We think there's massive benefits though from the model and the actual physical investment we're making in buildings for our ability to attract and retain people and give and help them improve their work-life balance, and also building this into a broader strategic alignment for how our sector and our service is structured overall. I might just ask you to move to the next page, Sue or team. So some of this I've already touched upon already, but there's probably two elements I'd like to just call out here. One of the ways we were able to gather insight and I think gain some further enthusiasm into this idea from not just the corporate areas of the service in the ACT, but also from other areas where we could sell the concept about what we are doing and what we're looking to push forward. So thinking around the reduction in commute times, taking people off the roads in peak periods, thinking about emissions reduction and climate targets, actually link this body of work to other very important and very high target political aspirations and aspirations of other parts of government. So what we have tried to do through this journey is actually to focus on, this is just not a corporate agenda, it's not just a management agenda or for our employees, it's about taking forward a whole range of policies that government might have. And this is one way of demonstrating how innovative we can be. I think that the last thing I'll lead off on is around innovation and collaboration. So yes, we have tools like today. One of our big focus points at the moment is building dedicated innovation spaces where teams can come together and innovate and work together and do things that need to happen to ensure that they remain cohesive, and that if you're new or if you've been around a while, that you remain fresh and on point is required. But we need to be able to bring people together in workspaces that support that. And then we need to be able to skill people to use that time well. So as I mentioned, one of our key questions we keep asking ourselves as we come out of lockdown this Friday and we move forward is, when we come back to work, why are we coming back to work? What do we have to do together that we can't do apart that is best served by being face to face? And how do we take advantage of that and leverage it forward? And then how do we bring everyone else on that change journey? So no matter what I say or Jackie might say or Sue or others, there is still lots of people who love having their staff face to face, front and centre, present. They think they get more out of them. Now, all of those questions can be dispelled fairly easily, but it's something we continue to challenge and be challenged by. And I think as we move forward, we'll need to find a much more informed place about, well, how do we deal where we think it's not working, or how do we deal well where it's working and reinforce that, but make sure that we bring everybody on that journey. Thank you. Back to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Damian. That was excellent. It really shows that we're dealing with systems thinking requirements here because of the complexity of all the things we're trying to manage all at once. I think I'll be very quick in summing up, and then we'll go to questions. We've got quite a few coming through already. So Jackie talked about future work is here now, and we can see it all around, the way we're using technology, the way we're collaborating in this very forum today. And these new ways of working are here to stay. But the benefit of doing this kind of work and this kind of research is that we have an evidence base to base our decision making as we go forward in the post-vaccination world. And when we're thinking about systems responses, we need to have that evidence and the data available to make those decisions. Jackie also talked about we won't be snapping back to pre-COVID arrangements. Work has changed and people have changed. But also flex work doesn't just relate to working from home. It's all elements of the flexible work as well. And finally, she talked about the public service currently focusing very much on customer experience, but Jackie views that in the future we'll be looking at our staff experience as well to exactly the same extent. Sue said very straightforwardly that the future of work is hybrid and remote. Staff expect this to continue and we won't be going back. Remote is also increasingly popular as a form of activity-based working. And Damian picked up on activity-based working in his talking points as well. And the design of physical workspaces will be very important as we try and increase productivity and collaboration when people are in the workplace, in the office. The other themes that came through were around managers needing more guidance and capability development to help people continue to adjust and thrive in these new environments. And a move to more outcomes focused and maybe project working is one of the trends that we're seeing, but that requires a different kind of performance management. Sue also talked about techno stress, which is potentially exacerbated in these environments. And she also talked about equity, making sure that we pay attention to that always, and how working from home during the COVID pandemic has not changed gender roles in the home at all. So when we come back into workplaces, into the office, we need to make sure that it's not just men that are coming back into those workplaces. Damian talked about optimizing the use of the workplaces, and interestingly spoke about symbols and symbolism. And I'd be really interested in talking to Damian further about what that is, and the risk of having different classes of worker. Also mentioned capability and leadership development. Team cohesion is a focus and an issue. And the role that we as large employers in certain locations can play in a different or more far-flung public outcomes. And Damian was talking a little bit there about the commute times and start times and taking cars off the road at peak, etc. So it's an interesting dimension as well. Okay, so over to questions. I've got one for Jackie first, if that's okay, and then one for Damian while we're waiting for the other questions to come through. So Jackie, and maybe you addressed this a little bit in your remarks, but is there a risk in referencing the future of work that our current workforce and management consider this not to be relevant right now?
Okay, so I'm not exactly sure what that question's trying to get at, but I'll have a go. What I think it means is that I don't think that our managers and our leaders are not interested in the future of work. I actually think they really understand that some of the changes that we're seeing and have seen over the last 18 months are absolutely here to stay. I think what they are grappling with is really to try and understand the long-term impacts and answer the questions that still have big question marks against them. So it's the challenge areas that Damian was talking about, for example, social cohesion and how people will, what it will mean for culture in organisations. There's a big question mark over productivity. I mean, how can you assess productivity outcomes really in the circumstances we're in? If you think about an average worker, for example, who's got young children, can we really be assessing how productive they are fairly, in a fair way, whilst they might also be trying to homeschool? The situation we're in now is the here and now, and we are trying our very best, all agencies, to manage that. But at the same time, I think there definitely is recognition that we need to be focused on the future for all the reasons that Sue and Damian have said. As we come out of this, we still need to have a vision for what our workforce will look like, how we are going to create the right work environment for them, the conditions of employment. And we know that as we recover from COVID, for example, there is going to be huge impact in the economy. We know, for example, the US economy is booming, right? It's going like great guns. That's going to have worldwide implications, but I'm not an economist, so let me put that to one side. But the two other things we know that CEOs are really challenged by is they're concerned about capability gaps, and particularly in the executive and higher echelons of different organisations where they're seeing massive gaps. And secondly, they know that the war for talent is going to hot up like we've never seen it before. So being an employer of choice and thinking about all the things we've talked about today is really important. And I think leaders know that. So I'm not too worried about we're focusing on the future when actually people's concerns are here and now. Our staff in tax are saying, what does the future hold? What's it going to look like? And that goes right back to my point at the beginning. You've got to have some kind of vision for the future, even if you're iterating as you go along. Give them something concrete and move on as you get more and more evidence.
Thanks, Jackie. So I'll just go to the next question. Performance is not all about output. What about behaviours such as time management, attitudes to work, techno rage, or management disconnection? How can the future of work embrace these challenges? And will the Fair Work Tribunal understand these challenges? Damian, I wonder if you could take that up.
Sure, I'll have a go at responding. Thanks, Andrew. I think performance management will become an interesting discussion as we progress through greater levels of flexible work or hybrid working. But I go back to the basics, and I think this is where the basics serves us well. If managers or supervisors are able to set expectation and set clear standards, then that will serve people well when we're managing through any output type problems or quality type problems or behavioural problems, because any appeal tribunal will look at what effort has been put into ensuring that workers and managers understand what is required, and I think that would be quite important there. But it's not like those challenges didn't exist before, and it's not like those challenges don't exist now in some workers who are still face to face. So I think, or working in an office-based environment across the country. So I suspect, as I hopefully mentioned early on in my point, getting the basics right serves us well, but it serves us well whether you're working remotely or working in an office. And the more that expectations can be set and understood and clearly articulated, then the better we are. Some of our work, and I've had the luxury of working in both Commonwealth, state, and now the territory. Some of our working arrangements lend themselves to really good measurement of productivity, be it call handling time, be it casework, be it a whole range of things, regulatory work you can do. But a lot of work has never lent itself to productivity. If you think of the policy development cycle and a range of other cycles, they're not on a productivity cycle. There's a quality element to that. So that is not new. So I think what we need to continue to do is dispel the myths, and somehow productivity will be impacted because people aren't home, because the way we've conceptualized it for a long time has not served all workplaces. So I think it actually comes down to the specific workplace and comes down to the type of work, that's produced as an output from that area, and being clear that that's a skill that managers and supervisors and leaders need to have and need to practice. Because, from my vantage point and in everywhere I've worked, you can tell where there are really high in functioning divisions and groups, because they tend to have a very clear sense of what's required to what standard. And that serves them well, no matter how they work. On the second point, I think etiquette and the way people interact in forums such as this is a new area of challenge, and is a new area where we need to be clear about behaviour. And it can be simple things like having cameras on and interacting, being available, or more. But again, not much different to when you're face-to-face in a large group setting. So I try not to distinguish between the two, rather focus on the core skills that help us to move forward. And from a HR corporate perspective, when we look at managers, and I look at managers who are saying that they can't have their staff at home because they're not as productive, and I ask them to tell me why. Unpack that. Why is it they can't be more creative? Because generally that they can't support that. In fact, it's preference, and their preference is being projected out. So something for us to watch. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Damian. That was great. Next question is for Sue. While research seems to focus heavily on the benefits of working from home, is there any research on the opportunity cost or loss of not having staff in the office, and the potential productivity collaboration losses by not having corridor conversations?
Yes, there is research around about that, and the research shows generally that there are difficulties in maintaining collaborations and networking and mentoring and people having those incidental conversations in the hallway and in the kitchens. And this could be one of the big downsides of working from home. The research shows that pretty much globally, and some large studies have found that networking is more difficult when people are working from home. Working remotely could be different, however, because if people are working in a remote working hub, they can still have access to colleagues or some colleagues. So that is an option. So the research does have the downsides of working from home. And then of course the questions are around, well, how can they be minimised? If those networking opportunities aren't there, how can organisations create them? How can those incidental coffee chats be recreated? Some of the big four accounting companies have said that organisations need to create virtual spaces where people can bump into each other. And so I think this is an area that is still developing, and the technology is lagging a little bit behind, but I think it's going to develop in the times to come.
Andrew, can I just jump in here if you don't mind?
Sure, Jackie.
I just want to make a point about the research. The research is a point in time piece of research, and it's quite clear in the paper that there is still a lot of questions that are unanswered, and some of these questions we won't be able to answer properly until we're out of this unusual situation where we've got people in and out of lockdown, we've got the kids working at home, we've got the pressure of anxiety and fear around COVID, etc. So this definitely is something that's going to move over time, and there's more to be done in this space. It's not, this report or piece of research doesn't say everything's rosy and off we go. I think everybody on this call will recognise there's still a huge number of challenges here. Damian's mentioned ones like capability uplift, for example, and even getting the basics, which we know in the traditional work setting, up to speed, because things like performance management have been an issue for 20 odd years or more, certainly since I've been in the public sector. So I just want to make that point. This is not a woohoo, here we go, embrace it all 100%. This is an eyes wide open. We're going to have to shift. We've already shifted. Let's make the most of it, and let's address the challenges and become more sophisticated as we move forward. Great.
Thanks, Jackie. I think we've probably got time for one more question, and I'd like to go to Damian. Damian, what's one thing a leader can do today to ready themselves and their teams for future work? What would be your suggestion?
One thing, I think for me, it comes down to the clarity that you have with regard to your particular work program. So the clearer you can be and the clearer you can communicate your expectations and the standards, then I think that will serve well for however you choose to construct a workforce, be it hybrid, flexible, or any other way. But then being mindful constantly that different interactions do serve and different people respond to different interactions and need it. So some people will like face-to-face, some people will be happy with remote, and using tools and mediums such as this. And as a leader, you need to be conscious of that and using all of those tools as you convey your message. So I don't think there is, picking up Jackie's point, one silver bullet here. There's not one thing that's going to make it work or not work, but it's how you thread everything through. And like with everything, the more senior you are, the more important your actions and behaviours are, and people will watch how you operate and how you interact, and that will set the tone and the direction for those underneath you, because you as a leader have the chance to reinforce or to be a blocker or a barrier to change. So I think the point Jackie touched upon, which we've probably glossed over a little bit, will be that, you know, we've talked about talent wars for a long time. The one thing that the pandemic has shown is that people can work from everywhere, and companies, both private and public, have no fear now about where people are positioned and placed. So, you know, our ability to retain people just ran headlong into other jurisdictions and other companies' interest in actually stealing those people away, because they're very comfortable with having people work remotely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew.
Great. Thank you very much, Damian. Thank you very much, everybody. We're out of time, I'm afraid. I'm sure we could have filled many afternoons with this topic. And I'm sure that, as Jackie said, there is lots more to discuss and discover. So I'd just like to thank Jackie Curtis, Sue Williamson, and Damian West for the time this afternoon. I can heartily recommend the report to you. It's very easy to read. It's beautifully laid out, and it's jam-packed full of interesting things for us to know. So with that, I'd like to wish everyone a happy afternoon, and thank you very much for your participation today. Goodbye. Thank you.